In 2015, Martin Shkreli became infamous almost overnight. His company hiked the price of a decades-old life-saving drug from $13.50 to $750 per pill. The move was legal, but it sent shockwaves across America and cemented his public image as the face of corporate greed. With a smirk in interviews, he mocked critics and leaned into the label people gave him, Pharma Bro. But the truth is more complicated. That notorious price hike was not what sent him to prison. The investigation that would eventually lead to his downfall had started years earlier, rooted in his hedge funds and a biotech company called Retrofin. Prosecutors later said he had misled investors and misused corporate resources. To understand how Martin Shkreli became one of the most infamous figures in modern business, you have to go back to the beginning. Early ambition. Martin Shkreli was born in 1982 and raised in Brooklyn in a family of immigrants from Albania and Croatia. He was a bright kid with an interest in both science and business. As a teenager, he landed an internship at Kramer, Berkowitz & Company, a hedge fund connected to Jim Cramer, who would later become a well-known CNBC host. At the fund, Shkreli was exposed to the high-risk world of biotechnology stocks. He learned how clinical trial results and FDA announcements could swing the fortunes of companies overnight. He developed a taste for that volatility and began to believe he could outsmart the market. By his early 20s, Shkreli wanted to be a player, not just an intern. In 2006, he launched his first hedge fund, Alea Capital Management. It didn't last long. A bad trade wiped it out. But Shkreli wasn't deterred. In 2009, he founded MSMB Capital, soon followed by MSMB Healthcare. These funds specialized in high-risk biotech trades. His bold predictions drew attention, but the actual performance often fell short of what he told his investors. That gap between reality and the story he presented would prove critical later. Retrofin and red flags. In 2011, Shkreli made a bigger move. He founded a biotech company called Retrofin. Its mission was to develop treatments for rare diseases, conditions often ignored by large pharmaceutical companies because the markets were small. On the surface, this was a noble cause. But according to prosecutors, Shkreli used Retrofin to paper over problems at his hedge funds. When MSMB lost money, instead of admitting failure, he arranged payouts to former fund investors using Retrofin's cash and stock. The payments were disguised as consulting agreements, but prosecutors later argued these were shams. To the Retrofin board, this looked like misuse of corporate funds. In 2014, they forced him out as CEO. Retrofin eventually sued him for $65 million, accusing him of looting the company. Shkreli, meanwhile, moved on to his next venture, one that would bring him international notoriety. The Daraprim scandal in 2015, Shkreli founded Turing Pharmaceuticals and quickly acquired the U.S. rights to a drug called Daraprim. Daraprim wasn't new. It had been around since the 1950s and was used to treat toxoplasmosis, a parasitic infection that can be deadly for people with weakened immune systems, patients with HIV, cancer, or organ transplants. For decades, the drug cost just $13.50 per pill. Soon after Turing acquired it, the price was raised to $750 per pill. The reaction was immediate. Doctors and hospitals complained they couldn't afford it. Advocacy groups warned that lives were at risk. Politicians from both parties condemned the move. News outlets plastered Shkreli's photo under headlines about greed. Online, he became the poster child for everything wrong with drug pricing. Rather than apologize, Shkreli doubled down. In interviews, he smiled and argued that the price was justified, even suggesting he should have raised it higher. To many, that arrogance confirmed he was the villain they imagined. Pharma Bro became a household name. Yet here's the key: the Daraprim price hike was legal. Outrageous, yes, but not a crime. The real legal trouble for Shkreli was already brewing elsewhere. Arrest and trial. In December 2015, federal agents arrested Martin Shkreli in New York. Prosecutors charged him with securities fraud and conspiracy. The case had nothing to do with Daraprim. Instead, it focused on his hedge funds and Retrofin, According to the government, Shkreli lied to MSMB investors about how the funds were performing. When the funds lost money, he used Retrofin's assets to secretly repay investors and cover his tracks. Prosecutors argued that this was fraud. The trial began in 2017 and lasted 6 weeks. Jurors heard from investors, employees, and accountants. The government said Shkreli built a house of cards, using deception and company money to prop up his reputation. The defense argued that his investors ultimately profited, and that he was guilty of being brash, not criminal. In August 2017, the jury delivered its verdict: guilty on 2 counts of securities fraud and 1 count of conspiracy to commit securities fraud. He was acquitted on other counts, but the convictions were enough. Shkreli was now a felon. Bail revoked while awaiting sentencing, Shkreli couldn't resist the spotlight. He posted online offering $5,000 for a strand of Hillary Clinton's hair. Prosecutors said the comment created a security risk. The judge agreed and revoked his bail. Shkreli was sent back to jail to await his fate. In March 2018, the court sentenced him to 7 years in prison and ordered him to forfeit over $7 million in assets. Among those assets was a cultural oddity, the only physical copy of the Wu-Tang Clan album Once Upon a Time in Shaolin, which Shkreli had purchased for $2 million. In 2021, the US government sold the album to help satisfy his debts. The civil case and lifetime ban. Even after his criminal conviction, Shkreli's legal troubles weren't over. The Federal Trade Commission and several states sued him over his handling of Daraprim. Their case wasn't about the high price, it was about anti-competitive tactics. They argued that Shkreli and his companies made it nearly impossible for generic competitors to access samples and data they needed to bring cheaper alternatives to market. In 2022, a federal court agreed. It found that Shkreli had orchestrated an illegal scheme to preserve a monopoly on Daraprim. The court ordered him to pay more than $64 million and, more dramatically, banned him for life from participating in the pharmaceutical industry. In 2024, an appeals court upheld the ruling. Release and Legacy Shkreli was released from federal custody in 2022, first to a halfway house and then fully free later that year. But he remains permanently banned from the industry that made him infamous. Online, he still attracts attention. Some admire his brashness and see him as a capitalist truth-teller. Others see him as the symbol of everything wrong with the pharmaceutical system. The Daraprim episode revealed serious weaknesses in the US drug market. When a company is the sole supplier of an older but essential drug, it can raise prices almost without limit. Shkreli didn't create that problem, but he embodied it in a way that forced the nation to confront it. His trial also highlighted the difference between what is legal and what is criminal. Raising prices may enrage the public, but misleading investors and misusing company funds crosses the line into fraud. Martin Shkreli's story is a cautionary tale of ambition, arrogance, and spectacle. From hedge funds to biotech, from Daraprim to Wu-Tang, from boardrooms to prison, his name became shorthand for greed. He didn't just play the game, he made himself the villain everyone wanted to hate. Today, he is out of prison but still barred from pharmaceuticals. His story continues to resonate as a reminder of how one person's choices can ignite debates about ethics, power, and profit that are still unresolved.